Okay, first and foremost, the classic response when you ask an Israeli in the street, how are you? And he tells you in response, Hakol Beseder, everything is okay, everything is good. What he's really telling you on a deeper level is that everything, which means the entire of Judaism, and really the entire foundation of our faith, is Beseder. It's all in the Seder on the night of Passover. It's all in there. It's all in there. That we have to cram a lot of energy and excitement and inspiration and passion into this evening, the night of Pesach. And if you live in the diaspora, which most of us do, I would imagine, then that would mean that we have 2 nights to accomplish this. But still, we know that there's a certain intensity of the first night, and we're going to talk just a little bit about that. Some of the introductory comments regarding the particular circumstances in which we find ourselves this year. Number one is, this Pesach is going to be different than any other Pesach by mere fact of the circumstances that we're confronted with this year, considering what's going on around the world. And probably you will remember Richard Dubin. I just want to say hello. How are you? Welcome. Probably this I think we have a unique opportunity to make this Pesach meaningful in a way perhaps that has not been meaningful before. Can everybody hear me? Switch to just going to plug in a wired connection, which might be more stable. Can you guys hear me clearly? Okay, hold on a minute. Going to a wired connection. Quick change. Good, cool. Samantha, you can hear me? Okay, great. Okay. And in one of my Sinai Scholars classes, we talk specifically about the beauty of Shabbat. And one of the challenges with our interactive social media technology world is that we are perhaps fooled into thinking that we are more connected and more alive than we've ever been in the past. And unfortunately, one of the ailments that strikes our generation is the ailment of being alone. We think we're connected, but often we feel very lonely. And maybe on some level, this Pesach will feel like it's you're alone. But the truth is, being alone is sometimes one of the most powerful experiences of connection. Even maybe we've had enough of it by this point. I don't know. But I'll say that you might have seen this on the going around on the internet, that when the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the one who began the whole Chabad movement that we're familiar with the Chabad houses opening up around the world, since his wife passed away, from the moment that his wife passed away, she passed away a couple weeks before Pesach. And then I think that was 1988, until the end of the Rebbe's life, the Rebbe actually did his Pesach Seder by himself, which I think is quite unbelievable, that he is an individual who people would have, given their skin to be able to participate in the Rebbe's Seder and be there when the Rebbe asks the 4 questions, and he talks at length about the story of the Exodus of Egypt, but nonetheless, the Rebbe chose to do it alone. And so there's obviously something very spiritual about perhaps this particular year where we are either going to be either totally alone or alone in a different way, where we're not necessarily with all of the family like we might otherwise be. So I just, my introductory comments are, there's a way to approach this in a positive way, I guess, as opposed to feeling anxious or perhaps upset. Okay, I just want to emphasize 2 things. One thing, first is that there are only 2 biblical mitzvahs that we are obligated to do on the night of the Seder. And even though there's probably a lot in your mind, wow, to run a Seder, I've got to have a Haggadah and a Seder plate and all the different signs, and I've got to, know what's going on. And there's only two biblical mitzvahs, which means that if you want to fulfill what it means to really celebrate Pesach, then you need to do these two things. Number one is you need to eat matzah. You need to eat matzah after it becomes dark on the night of Pesach, which will be Wednesday night after dark. You need to eat matzah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on, how much you need to eat and what the relevance of matzah is. And the second biblical mitzvah, in order to fulfill the night of the Seder, is to tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. These are the two biblical mitzvahs. There's a lot of other things going on, but that's either rabbinic or just custom. Certainly doesn't say make a Pesach Seder. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah to make a Seder, although obviously later on we learn this is part of Jewish custom. But certainly just to do these two mitzvahs on the night of Pesach is really the core, the ikr, the main thrust of the evening. And when you say telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt, that means telling it verbally. We have to actually recount the story. And telling it to yourself is fine if you're by yourself, which might mean just reading through the Haggadah that night. And then another thing is that come Pesach, we're very familiar with the possibility for criticism of another person's way of connecting or doing the Seder. And there was a classic story that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, said regarding a Jewish person at the Frierdiker Rebbe's Seder. This is the Rebbe's father-in-law, Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak Schneerson. He was at a Seder, and there was a Jew there. Now, for those of you who are familiar in Chabad, we don't dip the matzah in any liquids for the first 6 days of Pesach. And you might even say that we're radical about it. And there was a Jew at the Frierdiker Rebbe Seder. The reason why we don't dip the matzah in any liquids is we don't want the matzah. The biggest threat for there being leavened bread is in uncooked flour that could be in the matzah. So we don't dip the matzah in any liquids during Pesach. This Jew dipped his matzah, I guess, unknowingly in the borscht, right? And the borscht is, it's made from beetroots. So that turned the matzah red. He pulled it out, ready to take a bite, and somebody looked like he was going to say something. He was going to point this guy out. The Frierdiker Rebbe stopped him, and he told him, better to have red matzah than to have a red Jew. Better have a red matzah than a red Jew, which means it's better that you shouldn't embarrass somebody and eat matzah that was dipped in a liquid, which we know is only astringency, and specifically amongst Hasidim. So embarrassing another Jew is obviously worse, and therefore, specifically when it comes to the way that you practice this Seder, and if you're with other people, there's a great tendency to point out other people's wrongdoings or whatever. Don't do that, and we want it to be a genuine experience for each person at their level. And obviously, we want to celebrate the things that we end up doing. To continue, there are 3 names to this holiday, 3 names. The 3 names are as follows: Chag HaMatzos, which means the holiday of matzahs, eating the matzah. The second is Zman Cheruseinu, which means the time of our freedom. And the third is Chag HaPesach, which means the holiday of Pesach, the holiday of Pesach is the name of the holiday, but it really comes from the offering that Jewish people would bring in honor of the holiday, bringing the Paschal ram, the lamb, as a sacrifice to God. Today, obviously, we don't have a temple and we don't do that. And actually, what we do is we eat matzah instead. But these 3 names are very telling about the kind of mentality that we're supposed to be approaching the holiday. The holiday of matzahs, the time of freedom, and the holiday of Pesach. Now, Pesach, on the one hand, is the name of the sacrifice that the Jews brought, but Pesach, you know what the word Pesach means? Pesach comes from the fact that God jumped over the houses of the Jewish homes that had blood on their walls. They were commanded to paint their walls with blood. So the word Pesach comes from the word to jump, to skip, to leap. Now, The main idea of Pesach is the time of freedom. It's a time when miracles happen. The holiday that the month that this falls in is the month of Nisan. Nisan means the word comes from the word miracles, and nes is a miracle. And so it's the time of miracles. It's the time for freedom. It's the time for radical growth. It's the time for real change. And I think it's very personal. It's the opportunity to really break down your walls, break down your obstacles, break down the things that are holding us back. To illustrate this with a quick story, there was a famous Hasidic rabbi, Rabbi Yitzchak of Berdichev, probably my favorite of all Hasidic rabbis. He's called the great defender of the Jewish people because he always found a way to phrase things in the positive. You know, he found somebody smoking on Yom Kippur, and he came and he told him, "Did you know it's prohibited to smoke on Yom Kippur?" He says, "Yeah." And first he said, "You know that today is Yom Kippur?" The Jew says, "Yes, I know." He says, "You know it's prohibited to smoke on Yom Kippur?" And the Jew told him, "Yes, I know it's prohibited." He turned his head to the heaven and he said, "God, you see, even while your people, your children are in the midst of doing a sin, they will not tell a lie." So he always had a way to shift things into a positive way. The story goes that Berdichev is the name of the town where he sat as the rabbi, and he was the Rav of the town. On the first night of the Seder, he is finished his Seder, and he's feeling very, accomplished. And he, as he is sitting there, he obviously was a holy man. He had a certain, he heard a voice, I guess. He heard an announcement from the heavens that said that there was a Seder in your town that was greater than yours. There was a Seder in town that was even more, had a greater impact than your Seder. So that piqued his curiosity. Who could this be? I mean, he wasn't an arrogant person. He just genuinely wanted to know who could this be. And I don't know how he found out, but whether he knocked on people's doors, but he heard about a particular Jew that he thought maybe it's this guy. His name was Chaim, and he was a porter. They called him Chaim the porter. And he goes to Chaim's house and he knocks on the door, and Chaim's wife answers the door. When she sees who it is, the Rav of the town is at her door, and it's late. It's after the Seder's over on the first night. It's in the early hours of the morning. He says, "Is your husband here?" And she's so embarrassed. She's like, "Oh gosh, he's coming to expose my wretched husband. What's happened?" He comes in, and she says, "Give me a second." He hears her filling up a jug of cold water. She goes into the bedroom, and she throws the cold water on her husband's face. He wakes up, and she says, "Chaim, the rabbi of the town is here. He's probably coming to point out how you messed up." Chaim comes out all embarrassed, and he looks at the rabbi. He's wiping his face. He's all wet. And Rabbi Yitzchak says to him, "Chaim, tell me about your Seder tonight." And Chaim says, "Rabbi, I'm embarrassed. Do you really want me to divulge all the details?" So he says, yeah, I would like to know. Tell me what happened. He said, "Rabbi, it really wasn't much of a Seder." He says, no, please tell me, share with me what happened. So he says, "You know what? I was this morning. I woke up late, and went out on the street, and I saw people going crazy. They were like running this way and that way. I mean, if you've seen Jews before Pesach, the day before Pesach, they're going nuts, right? Selling their chametz, burning their chametz, cleaning their houses." We were outside today cleaning my car, and my son took his car seat out, and you could feed an army with all of the bisli and pretzels and corn chips that were smushed through the upholstery. Anyways, people are going berserk right before Pesach. So he's asking people, "What's going on? What are you doing?" They say, "Chaim, don't you know tonight is Pesach?" He says, "Pesach? What's going on?" They say, "Pesach? What am I supposed to do?" They told him, and then Chaim liked to say a few l'chaim. He used to drink a little bit, and they told him, "Chaim, no whiskey over the course of Pesach." He said, "What? No whiskey? How long? How long is Pesach for?" It's like 8 days, 7 days, 8 days. He says, "What? No whiskey for 8 days?" He runs straight to the liquor store. He buys himself 8 days worth of whiskey. He goes home and he he pours himself enough whiskey to last for 8 days. He drinks it all down. He thinks, oh, hopefully this will get me through the 8 days. And that's it. He passes out, totally drunk. In the middle of the night, right before midnight, we know on the night of Pesach, he's supposed to eat the afikomen, which is that the piece of matzah that we set aside at the beginning of the Seder. Supposed to eat that before midnight. His wife is sitting at home. Her husband, snoring loudly because he's passed out. And she comes shaking him, Chaim, you got to get up. We have to do the Seder. It's only a few minutes before Pesach, before midnight. We got to eat the afikomen. Chaim's all in a daze. What are you talking about? He comes to the table. He looks around on the table. He sees, the chicken neck and the horseradish and the matzah, and he doesn't know what to do. His head is pounding. He's drinking some wine. It's only a few minutes. His wife's hucking a china. She's calling him, stressing him out. He doesn't really know what he's doing. He says, he takes a big bowl and he puts it all in the bowl with the 4 cups and the horseradish and the romaine lettuce, and he takes it and he drinks the whole thing down, 4 cups and everything. Oh, and before he drinks it, he looks up to the heaven and he says, God, I really don't know what this whole holiday is all about. All I know is that the Jewish people are around today, and we have a great God who took us out of Egypt many years ago. And we pray that God will, just like God took us out of Egypt back in the story of the Exodus, so too God's going to take us out of this current exile. And please, God, forgive my ignorance, but I mean well. And with that, he drinks all the 4 cups together with all of the other things, the horseradish and the matzah, and he passes out again. And that was how Rabbi Yitzchak found him in his room, passed out. Rabbi Yitzchak turns to his students and he says, this is the Seder that was declared in heaven and was greater than mine. Obviously, this is one way to do the Seder, and I'm not encouraging you to do it this way. But the point of the story, I think, is obvious that he was genuine. He didn't know much, and he didn't pretend to be a great chacham, a great wise sage. He just genuinely spoke to God from his heart, and that was considered more precious than even the great Rabbi Dovid Birk. So I guess approaching the Seder, maybe this year more than ever, you're not on show. You're not on show. You're just, you're connecting genuinely. Okay, that's one story. I'm going to move on to matzah for a second. Since we said earlier that, firstly, one of the names of the holiday is called Chag HaMatzos, the holiday of matzos. And moreover, the main event of the holiday is that night of Passover is to eat matzah. So just quickly, practically, you need to eat in order to fulfill the mitzvah. In Judaism, eating is not just whatever I feel like. Eating is a specific amount in a specific time, right? So you need to eat just under 1 ounce of matzah on the night of Pesach to fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah. Now, if you're eating machine-made matzah, which is the square matzah that you buy in the supermarket, I don't know, Manischewitz or Streets, whatever, then you need just under 1 ounce is about 3/4 of a square matzah. 3/4 of a square matzah. If you're eating the shmura matzah, which is the large round matzahs that are handmade, the matzah that's guarded. Shmura means guarded. It's guarded from coming into contact with wheat from the time of harvest, right? They look for a dry day, they harvest the wheat, and they're very cautious about it coming into contact with the water, because once wheat hits water, the whole leavening process begins, and then if it's together for more than 18 minutes, it turns into matzah. It turns into chametz, which is the enemy of the holiday. We don't want to eat chametz. So shmura means guarded from coming into contact with water. And then on the day that they actually make the matzahs, they're very careful about when they introduce the water and the wheat together. And it's normally baked in much less than 18 minutes, but 18 minutes is the cutoff. So if you're eating machine-made, the 3/4 makes up enough for you to do the mitzvah. If you're eating one of the round handmade shmura matzahs, then you need to eat about 1/3 of one of those matzahs. Okay, you need to eat about 1/3 of one of those matzahs. Now, you need to eat it between, there's obviously a number of opinions, between 4 and 7 minutes. So I'm talking about that amount, whether it's a third of a round matzah or it's a 3/4 of a machine-made matzah. There are more times in the Seder that we eat matzah, but the minimal, if you want to do the mitzvah, is to eat this amount that night, on the night of Pesach. But there are more times that we eat matzah. And there's 4 times that we eat matzah. The first is we eat matzah to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah. Then we eat more matzah to fulfill the mitzvah of eating bread. You have to do, like we do any Shabbat or Yom Tov, eat bread. Then you do it again for Korach, which is the sandwich. And we eat the sandwich with the maror and the charosas. And then at the end of the whole Seder, the very last thing that we do is we eat matzah again, which is the afikomen, which that represents the paschal sacrifice. So really, if you want to do the ultimate, you need to eat 4 times. So if you're doing the square matzahs, 4 times 3/4, it's about 3 square matzahs. And if you want to do it with the round matzahs, it's about 1 1/3. 1 1/3 round matzahs. That's if you want to do it for all of those steps. Each time we eat matzah, we try to eat that amount to fulfill the mitzvah. Okay, we know that at the Seder there are 3 matzahs, right? 3 matzahs for many, many symbolisms. But one is that there are 3 forefathers. That sounds funny. 3 fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then there's a number 4, which is the cups of wine. It's 3 matzahs and 4 cups of wine. And the 4 cups of wine represent the imaot, which are the mothers. So there are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then there's Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. That's the 4 mothers, and they correspond to the wine. Some people want to know, do women have the obligation to drink wine too? And the answer is absolutely. And according to Kabbalah, you could even say women are even more obligated because the wine, because there are 4 cups of wine that correspond to the four mothers, they may be even more, it's even more relevant for them to do so. And these mitzvahs of eating matzah and drinking wine are relevant, obviously, to both men and women. But another interpretation is that the matzahs represent Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael, right? Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael. These are the 3, I guess, modern day denominations of Jews, the priests, the Levim, and the Yisrael. And we choose matzahs, if you're doing the round matzahs, we choose matzahs that actually are concave, that are curved up, and we place them in that shape because Kohen, Levi, Yisrael spells Keli. Keli, Kohen, Kuf, Levi is Lamed, and Yisrael is Yud, and that's a Keli is in Judaism a vessel. On some level, the matzahs are the vessel through which we are receiving this divine energy on the night of Pesach. So Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael spells Keli. What is actually going on at the Seder? Okay, here we go. I thought about this on some level. Life is like a game, right? Life is like a game, which means that on any game, there's a mission. And if you want to try and accomplish your mission, there are obstacles, there are enemies, but every superhero has powers, special powers, whatever they are, to accomplish their mission. There's no greater holiday in the Jewish calendar which captures this idea more so than Pesach. Pesach is like we said, called the Seder, everything is in the Seder. It's like in concentrated form, it's the game of life. What is the goal? So the goal is to be free, to connect to that which is free, to be free. The enemy is Egypt and Chametz. Egypt being Mitzrayim in Hebrew, and Chametz is leaven. We're going to call leaven Chametz because that's the enemy on the night of Pesach, and it's for the holiday of Pesach, Chametz being the leaven, whatever leaven products there are in our life. But we're not just afraid of bread and pasta, it's what it represents, which we're going to talk about in a second. And whatever, in Egypt, we're not afraid of Egypt. I mean, we're obviously, Egypt, it's what Egypt represents. That is our our main obstacles. And our powers, our special powers, I guess, that allow us to accomplish our mission are the things at the Seder, the matzah, the maror, the paschal sacrifice, the Pesach, and the 4 cups of wine, but specifically matzah. So just to elucidate on this idea quickly, the holiday is called the holiday of freedom, which is called Zman Cheirusenu, the time of our freedom. What is freedom? And this is the most important question for you to ask on the night of your Seder. What does it mean to be free? What does it really mean to be free? How do I accomplish freedom? This can be answered in so many different ways, okay? One quick idea, I guess, in the story of Genesis, we're told that man is created in the image of God, right? But elsewhere in the Torah, we're told in many places that God has no image, right? We're actually warned against attributing any imagery to God. God has, we use anthropomorphic language, but we don't ever want to say that God has an arm or a mouth or eyes, even though the Torah speaks like that. But that's just for us to be able to understand how God is interacting with the world. So if God fundamentally has no image, you know, some women wear shaitels, right? They cover their hair, and in the shaitel head that they keep in their room has like, you're not supposed to even have a shaitel head. I'm talking about, sounds funny, but I'm just bringing you into a different world. You're not, the shaitel head can be like a mannequin in your house, and you're not supposed to have actual facial features in any way, shape, or form captured in some sort of sculpture or mannequin, so to speak. So people will cut off the nose or something, so it doesn't look human. We don't want to have any sculptures or anything that even represents a form that we may attribute any deity to, because God has no image, he has no form. So now going back to the previous statement, if man is created in the image of God, but God has no image, so then what image is man created in? Man is created in the image of God, but God has no image. So then what image are we created in? Now there are obviously many answers to this question, but one answer is man is created in the image of that which has no image. Man is created in the image of that which has no image, which means fundamentally that we ourselves don't have any image. And when I say that, I don't mean, your profile in the mirror. I mean literally the way we limit ourselves, box ourselves, constrain ourselves, restrict ourselves. They're all self-imposed. And that the truth is, we are actually fundamentally free. The greatest gift that God ever gave the Jewish people was freedom from the time that we left Egypt. We became a free people. Now, there's a difference in Judaism between two words. One is chayrus and the other is chofesh. Chofesh means vacation, right? For those of you who in Israel, or you go on chofesh, vacation, right? School's off, class is off. We're on vacation right now because of the coronavirus, but more than that, kids have left school now. Even my kids in online school, the online school has ended. They're on chofesh, they're on vacation. But there's another word, and that's the word that this holiday is called. It's called the Zman Cheirusenu. Cheirus means freedom. They might sound similar, but the holiday is not called Zman Chofshenu. It's not called the time of our vacation. We left slavery and we went on a holiday. It's called Zman Cheirusenu. Cheirusenu meaning the time of our freedom. And why am I emphasizing this? Because what's the difference between vacation and freedom? Vacation is where I put my responsibilities on hold and I clear my calendar. And we all know that on some level, when your calendar is cleared, that's I can do what I want with my time. But that isn't freedom. freedom is when I know fundamentally my mission, what I'm supposed to be accomplishing, and I can pursue it without any obstacles, or I can pursue it despite the obstacles. And I go ahead and actually, I work in an exerted fashion to accomplish that mission. And this is actually reflected in the story, right? The Jewish people are taken out of Egypt. God doesn't just say, hey, listen, I killed the Egyptians and I took you out of Egypt and I plonked you in the desert and you're free. Go for it. How long would we have survived, right? We would have, I don't know, we wouldn't have survived very long. We would have been out there in the desert. I mean, we were Jews that were slaves. We wouldn't know how to deal with the snakes and scorpions and the heat. And we would have basically, we would have expired right there. But that's not what God did. He took us out of Egypt, but then he gave us a Torah. He took us out of Egypt and then he took us to Mount Sinai and he said, here's your mission. This is what you have to do. Real freedom means having a structure, having a goal that I need to accomplish and being able to pursue that goal despite my restrictions. So this could answer one classic question that you could ask about the Seder, right? Seder means order. Seder means order. And at the beginning of the Haggadah, there are 15 steps that are listed in the Haggadah. 15 steps that we work throughout the Seder nights. Now, one question you could ask is, if the whole objective of the night is to be free, you know, when we sit and we eat matzah and we drink wine, we recline as a symbol of the fact that we are like free people. So what's this whole Seder? Why do I have to do it in a particular order and a structure? And so I think one answer that I'm suggesting is that the objective of freedom that God wants from us is that we surrender ourselves to a structure that is given to us by God. And when we do that, we bond and connect with God who is truly free. And then we ourselves can experience freedom. And if you don't do it that way, the Torah tells us that fundamentally man surrenders himself, herself to some structure. We naturally do that as part of our lives. I surrender myself to some structure. And if it's a structure that's man-made, then ultimately I'm just bonding with the man-made source that made that structure. What we're seeking on the night of the Seder is to bond and connect with God, who is not bound by any limitations, and therefore the structure that God gives us, which is the Torah and the ideas that the Torah represents, is in essence us connecting with God through the structure of the Torah. This is like a big concept. This is a big concept. I was just reading this morning that the Rebbe emphasizes the importance in the Sikha, right, coming up to Pesach, he emphasizes the importance of being in life fully engaged in every moment and not letting time pass in a haphazard way, but being aware of the critical nature of every moment of our lives. And anything that holds you back from being able to accomplish your mission, that is Egypt. That is Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is a psycho-spiritual prison, a prison that limits us. Egypt, we're told in the Haggadah, we say every person in every generation has to consider themselves as if they are leaving Egypt. That doesn't mean that we traveled to the Middle East and we went into Egypt and we left the country. It means that we are getting out of our Egypt. We're getting out of our Mitzrayim. We're getting out of our limitations and our restrictions and our things that hold us back. And I guess part of the objective of the night is to ask yourself personally, what's my Egypt? What's my Mitzrayim? In order to be able to have it's quite a confrontational question. You know, you can ask this question in a public Seder and you'll get all kinds of answers. If people have a feeling of taking this seriously, then they might offer some serious answers. In order to be able to do this, we need matzah. We need matzah, and we can't have chametz. So just a quick few ideas about, so we've got Egypt being limitations, restrictions, and we also have chametz. Chametz is this leaven that we're trying to stay away from. Chametz represents all the evils that stunt our growth. Chametz is this leaven. The difference between chametz and matzah is that matzah is flat. It has no taste and it doesn't rise. It tastes like the cardboard in which it arrives in the matzah box. It doesn't have any, it's simple and plain. And that's because the steps towards transformation require me going back to basics, require me canceling my sense of self, my sense of ego, because that's what holds me back. That's what defines me. And we're trying to get out of definition on the night of the Seder. And the chametz can be subtle. It can be seeking recognition. It can be looking for honor. It can be selfishness. It can color decisions I make because I have a self-interest in them. I had a story. I'm going to tell another story just quickly. Before I tell that story, another thing about chametz is chametz happens when you don't do anything. Leaven happens when you don't do anything because you put flour and water together, and if you don't bake it, right, then it can turn into chametz, which means if I delay taking action, the result is chametz. In fact, the Torah uses the word chametz. It tells us you should seize the opportunity to do mitzvot and don't let a mitzvah become chametz. Don't let a mitzvah become chametz. A mitzvah can become chametz because I didn't take the opportunity when it came to me. It was a missed opportunity, which means real transformation, real action has to happen now. It's got to be now. And that's why on the night of the Seder, eating matzah is something that we have to be proactive in order to end up with matzah. We have to take that flour, put it together with water, and bake it because it represents taking action now. One large, fat piece of, difficulty of moving forward in life is I'll put it off. I'll put it off till later. Matzah is about taking action now. The other thing is criticism. Chametz is the ability to look at other people and to criticize and to be critical about the way other people live their lives, or to be critical about them and to feel like a sense of like I'm coveting other people's stuff. Here comes a classic story that I heard, and it's funny. It's a funny story, and it's worthwhile sharing. It starts off with a question. Firstly, the classic Rav of a city called Preshburg. His name was the Chatam Sofer Moshe Schreiber. He asks a classic question. His question goes like this: on the night before Pesach starts, we check our house for chametz, right? We go around with a candle and a light and a spoon and a feather, and we collect all the chametz and we put it together in a bag, and in the morning we burn it, right? So the tradition is to go around with a bag, a candle, and a feather and a spoon. And you pick up the bits of bread. You put out 10 pieces of bread. There's a Rav in California. He says the biggest question that everybody asks him, and the question that people ask him the most is every year right before Pesach is, I put out 10 pieces of bread and I only found 9. What do I do, Rabbi? I'm stuck. I put out 10, only found 9. Oy vey, now you've got 1 piece of bread roaming free. When we used to do this in my home in Australia, we had a dog. His name was Doozy, and he would go around eat, and he would eat all the bread that we put out. So we inevitably never found all the 10 pieces because he would eat them. Anyways, his question, the Chasam Sofer, Moshe Schreiber's question is that I understand that at the end of the whole checking for chametz, you put in the bag the feather and the spoon, but why do you put the candle in the bag and burn the candle? Right? The feather and the spoon, I picked up the bread with, and the bag, I put it in the bag, which means all those things touched the bread. But the candle, I just walked around holding a candle. Why should I burn the candle? The tradition was to put the candle in the bag too and burn the candle. And I think understood in the context of the time, a candle was something precious. Wax wasn't easy to come by. Why should I burn the candle? I'll just put it, set it aside. It was only the light that shone from the candle that helped me find the bread. Why do I throw the candle away? And he answered a very, I think, a beautiful answer. And his answer was, since the candle's sole objective is to point out the chametz, the bread, that's all the candle's point is, right, in this exercise. That candle itself is tainted because its entire purpose is to find the chametz, to find the evil, the flaws, the character flaws in, which is the chametz, in something else. And anyone who's constantly seeking to find chametz in other people, which means our own criticism of ourselves and other people, that itself is not kosher. We don't want that on Pesach, because that's going to hold us back. That's going to limit me. And the story goes like this. There was a famous Hasidic Jew, his name was Shmuel Munkus. Shmuel Munkus was a chassid, a student of the famous founder of Chabad. His name is Shneur Zalman of Liadi. But he was like a prankster. Shmuel, he was like a prankster. He was a jokester. He used to do things which were comical and funny, but he had a very serious tone to his nature. But he went about it in a very comical way. So in those days, we're talking now in the 1800s, it was common that Magidim, which are preachers, would go around from town to town and they would give speeches and people would give them money. And the whole objective of the giving of the speeches was to incite a sense of repentance and remorse and to move the people to emote. And it was pretty common to have these people saying things which were very critical of the community and caused the people to feel very repentant, and they would give money to this preacher. And the Hasidic Jews, they didn't like this because they knew that these preachers themselves were they were filled with their own inconsistencies. So one time, Shmuel was in a city where one of these preachers came, and he stood up at the podium and he started pointing out all the mistakes and the foibles and the character flaws of all the people. And within a short amount of time, he did it in a way which really inspired the people to feel very repentant. And they started crying, and the old people are crying, we're big sinners and we need to do tshuva and we're so sorry, and how do we forgive? How's God going to forgive us? So after the speech was over, Shmuel found where this preacher was staying in his hotel room, and he goes and knocks on the door, and he knocks on the door. The guy opens up. He sees the rabbi. He thinks, oh, he must be coming to give me some charity and to tell me how good my speech was. So Shmuel comes in, and behind him, he locks the door, and he takes out a huge knife, a knife which is like what a slaughterer would use to slaughter animals. And he says to this, obviously the preacher is terrified. He's thinking, what is this? Jews coming to hurt me? And he sees Shmuel, the Hasidic Jew, with a yarmulke and tzitzis. What is he gonna hurt me? So Shmuel says to him, listen, in our town over here, we don't have, it's a custom before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it's a custom to go to the graves of the righteous. I don't know if you've heard of this custom, but many Jews travel, sometimes multiple hours, to go to the graves of the righteous and to pray to God. There's a certain connection there, to pray to God to forgive them. He said, in our town, we don't have any righteous people buried here. And after hearing your speech in the shul, you clearly are a very righteous person. And I figured, rather than all of the people in our community needing to travel long distances to go to someone who's very righteous, I'll just I'll serve the community by killing you, and we'll bury you locally, and that way we can just go straight to your grave right before Yom Kippur. This guy starts to freak out. He's like, what? He's thinking, are you serious? You're actually going to kill me? So Shmuel says, well, he says, well, based on the way you spoke, you clearly are very righteous. And suddenly he says, oh, I'm not so righteous. So Shmuel says, oh, humble too. Perfect, you're righteous and humble. That's it. So that he starts edging close to him, and suddenly the man says, I've done some sins. I'm not such a right. And Shmuel says, you've done some sins? Could you share with me some of these sins that you've done? So he says, one time I ate and I didn't make a blessing, and then there was another time that I didn't put my right shoe on before my left shoe. Shmuel says, these are nothing. These aren't sins. Not like the rest of us in the community. Not how you were talking. We're all big sinners. These are small. You're still very righteous relative to us. He says, no, Rabbi, I've done some serious sins. He says, oh, could you share with me? And he slowly but surely gets the man to sort of admit that he himself has actually done some very, disgusting and gross things in his life. And Shmuel looks at him and says, how dare you come to this community and point out how bad everybody else is when you yourself have so much work to do? And you yourself are clearly a big sinner. So the point, only Shmuel Munkus, there's a book about him, and all of his stories are great stories. But it tells us about the kind of attitude that we need to have before we're pointing out mistakes and flaws in other people. We have to be critical and realize that we ourselves are not so perfect. Now, I said that chametz is being critical of other people. We don't want to be overly critical of ourselves, but we do need to be honest. We need to be honest about who we are, where we're at. And that honesty comes from matzah, because matzah is flat. Like I said, it's not inflated. It represents humility. And the first stage to change is being willing to look honestly at who I am, where I've got to, and where I'm going. Have some sort of sense of honesty about my current situation. Making space in my life to see that I still have work to do to become the best that I can be. That's matzah. When we imbibe matzah, when we eat matzah, we're both basically eating that sense of humility. And like I said before, it's humility which leads to action, which needs to happen now. Because matzah is about taking action now. Okay, a few more thoughts, and then we'll all fall asleep. Okay. I said at the beginning of the class that two of the important, the two biblical mitzvahs on the night. One is eating matzah. We spoke a little bit about the significance of matzah, and the other one is telling the story. Telling the story about people, telling the story of the Exodus in Egypt, and it needs to be done verbally. So, first and foremost, that's why we have a Haggadah. The Haggadah is designed to tell a story, and it's meant to be told in story format. It's not a Dvar Torah, it's not a drasha, it's not a sermon. It's supposed to be a story. And the methodology of telling the story needs to be in question and answer format. It needs to be a story told in response to a question. And this comes from the Torah itself, because it says that one day your son is going to ask you and you have an obligation to tell him, and it's talking about the holiday of Passover, which means that the telling of the story of Passover needs to be answering a question of a child. We need to be in the mode of children on the night of the Seder, because whether they're actual physical children, meaning youngsters under the age of bar mitzvah at your Seder or not, or you're just there by yourself, or you're just there with adults, we need to get into the mindset of a child in order to be able to have a meaningful Seder. We need to be children at the Seder, which is why we all ask the Manishtana. It's obviously, we have the youngest child person there at the Seder who asks the Manishtana, and he sings it, and everyone's, oh, that's so cute. But very importantly, the Rebbe says, and like I mentioned at the beginning, when the Rebbe did the Seder by himself, even adults themselves need to ask these questions, because part of freedom is having the ability to ask questions. If you can't ask questions, then you're not free. You're trapped. Either you think you know all the answers, or you're not given the space to ask questions. Asking questions is critical to freedom, because asking questions means that you're curious, you don't understand, I want to learn more, I'm compelled to explore this more. And my favorite story to illustrate this is, there was once a Russian immigrant who came to the United States of America, and he was being interviewed about his experience in Russia. And so they said, tell us, what was life like in Russia? So he said, well, I couldn't complain. The interviewer was a little shocked. He said, you couldn't complain? I thought Russia's communism wasn't difficult. Tell me, what was it like getting a job? He says, I couldn't complain. Really? Okay. And, what about raising your children? I couldn't complain. What about getting food? I couldn't complain. Every answer, I couldn't complain. The interviewer says, I'm sorry, but I'll ask you a question. And that is that, if life was so good in Russia that you couldn't complain, so then why'd you come to the United States of America? He says, because here I can complain. He says, here I can complain. They say when you go to a Jew in a restaurant and the waiter has to ask, is anything okay? Because Jews are critical. No, we ask questions. Asking questions is critical. And a child, no one does it better than a child, right? No one does it better than a child. And just a few things. Why children? Number one is that the classic story of the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe that asked the question, what's the difference between children and adults, right? That an adult, if you wrong somebody when you get older, or somebody wrongs you, you can bear a grudge for many years, never talk to that person again, right? I don't know. He said something that, and I will never talk to him again. And you, because of our arrogance, we just ruined a relationship for life. It could be many years before you ever, and maybe never, resolve that relationship. But children, right, and I can see this with my kids all the time, they have a fight. I hate you, and I'm never going to talk to you again. You're the meanest, and you're the worst, and this and that. And then 5 minutes later, they're playing again in total adoration and love for each other. What happened here? With kids, they forgot about the conflict, and adults live with that conflict for their whole life. So he said that the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe said that that's the difference between children want to be happy and adults want to be right. Children want to be happy and adults want to be right. So the first thing about a child is that a child wants to be happy. And happiness trumps being right. Needing to be right is a sense of, I guess, sourced in arrogance. I want to prove myself, I'm right. But needing to be happy, ultimately, is far more important. Children live in the moment. They're impulsive, which means they act without taking into account the consequences of their actions. But there's something very pure about that. This is how I feel. Is what I live in the moment. The child lives in the moment. You have a question, ask the question. A child is very curious. Imagine an adult. Imagine you go out of the house one day and you go to the end of the street and you don't have your wallet and you don't have your keys and you don't have your phone, and you basically on the corner of the street you have a heart attack because you've got none of your securities. You've got no phone, no wallet, no keys. Kids run out of the house, down the street, no keys, no wallet, nothing. Just total freedom, right? Because they're not trapped by all of these complications of our lives. Children are there's a certain simplicity to children, which is why children are so beautiful to be around, because it's about living in the moment. Okay, we need to get into that mindset in order to be able to experience true freedom. Ask questions, Be curious, ask questions. Something comes up in the Haggadah and it seems curious to you. If you're with other people at the Seder, don't be afraid to stop and to talk about it and to ask questions on it. It is a text, but it's, Judaism is not afraid of questions. Only lies are afraid of questions because they're scared that you're going to uncover the lie. But the truth is not afraid of questions because there are answers. But there's also just beauty in asking a good question. We'll get shortly to the end. Here we go. Just a few other things. Number one is we've got matzah, which is important to eat on the night of the Seder. But in addition to that, the rabbis instituted that we need to drink 4 cups of wine. This is a great mitzvah that people take it very seriously. For women, husbands are supposed to buy their wives jewelry. For women, for wives, they're supposed to make sure their husbands have nice wine. I don't know, maybe women need nice wine too, I don't know. I'm sure they do. Minimally, what does it mean to drink wine, since we established before that eating and drinking in Judaism have a time frame? We said 4 to 7 minutes. In order to drink a cup of wine, there's a measurement. The measurement is 3.5 ounces. So a regular small shot glass is 1 ounce. There's 2-ounce shot glasses. A standard cup, I don't know, is maybe 9 or 10 ounces. So 3.5 ounces, not so much. It's quite small, 105 mil. Supposed to drink 4 of these cups at the Seder. And that, if you follow the Haggadah, it tells you when to do it. You need to drink. It's better to have a smaller cup and drink the majority of the cup than to have a large cup and only have a sip. You're supposed to drink at least the majority of the cup. If you could finish the whole cup, it's better. Why wine? So we've got matzah is one of our special powers, and our enemies are chametz and Mitzrayim. So wine, yayin, we're told in the Torah and the Kabbalah that nichnas yayin yatzasad. The wine goes in and the secrets come out. Now we know that means that on a very, physical level, after you say a few l'chaim, you drink wine, a person is a little looser with some of the things that maybe they should be keeping secret. But on the deeper level, it literally means that the imbibing of wine creates a space where a person can feel less restricted. Wine goes in and the secrets come out. We mentioned before that the 4 cups of wine correspond to the women, to the ima'ot, the Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, and therefore there's something about wine which is perhaps more feminine. The truth is that the numbers 4 and 3 are very relevant. They're discussed a lot in Kabbalah. 3 represents the process of transmission, and the number 4 is more about the way I assimilate an idea. But maybe that's for another time. The last thing, two more things quickly. One is maror. We need to eat maror at the Seder, right? Maror is the bitter herbs. There's many traditions. The Chabad tradition is to eat romaine lettuce. They say the ends, the tips of the romaine lettuce are bitter, and the root, the stem is sweeter, the white part. That's because we understand that there's a certain process. Now, maror, it's supposed to be bitter, and you need to actually taste the bitterness. So much so that if you could somehow eat matzah without tasting it, even though it doesn't really have a taste, you would be okay. But when it comes to maror, you actually need to taste the bitterness. It needs to actually be bitter in your mouth, which means if you were to swallow the maror, if that would even be possible, swallowing a piece of romaine lettuce without chewing it and tasting the bitterness, you didn't do the mitzvah. You need to, and again, just to know, the mitzvah of eating maror is not biblical, it's rabbinic. It used to be biblical in the times of the temple, but it's no longer biblical. It's only rabbinic. But just a couple ideas about maror. Why do I need to eat this bitter thing? If the whole night is the night of slavery, is a night of freedom from slavery, why am I engaging with an activity which reminds me of bitterness? So just a couple quick ideas about maror. One is, if you can't feel the pain of another, if you can't empathize with another person, you can't ever really truly be free, because that means you're locked into your own self. The experience of maror is to appreciate the pain and suffering in Jewish history that we've been through, and obviously to contrast that with a new horizon of freedom and joy, etc. But it needs always to have an element of, I've got to remember and be able to connect with other people's pain. If I can't do that, I can't truly be free. And another element of the maror is of the bitterness is, in order to have real transformative change, I need to be aware of the fact that I'm not complete. I feel bitter about my own situation. Why would a person who feels perfect want to transform themselves or move towards change? There needs to be an element of, I'm not entirely complete as I am. Someone once told me an analogy for this. I think it's a very beautiful analogy. If you take water and you bring it to the boil, right? You look at that water before you boil it. You say, oh, is this water clean? Yeah, I can see from right through the water, right? You put it in a cup and I can't see anything in the water. But if you boil that water, what happens? So slowly impurities come out of the water and they rise to the surface. But before I boiled it, I didn't see any impurities. The water looked good, which means when I put the water under the heat or above the heat, I heat up the water, impurities can come out. So sometimes things may look good and look perfect, but upon closer examination, there's actually some impurities there. I think this is one very relevant point to the idea of maror. Okay, my last thought before I finish is the story of Eliyahu Hanavi. And we know that at the end of the Seder, when we drink our fourth cup, we also pour a cup for Elijah the prophet. And people, this is a very beautiful point, I guess, in the Seder, a certain hope for the future. And we certainly need that now. We need to feel that there's a brighter future for us coming. And Eliyahu Hanavi represents that bright future, because Eliyahu Hanavi always comes. Richard, we're talking about Elijah the prophet. It's at the very end of the Seder, and Elijah represents the hope for a brighter future, right? Because Elijah always comes to save people at a time of need. There are all the stories from the Torah where things happen right when a person was basically out of any luck, and suddenly Elijah the prophet appears and in one, saves the Jewish people, or saves this person from their difficulties. Now, this is my favorite Elijah the prophet story, and it goes like this: that there was a Jewish man who wanted desperately to see Elijah the prophet. This is like, to see Elijah the prophet, to merit to see Elijah the prophet, was considered like one of the greatest revelations. And he desperately wanted to do this. So he went to his famous teacher. The teacher was Rabbi Yisroel Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. And he told him, Rabbi, I want to see Elijah the prophet. So the Baal Shem says, well, why do you want to do that? And he tells him, desperation, I have to see him. I've got this. See, there were many suggestions of what a person can do to see Elijah the prophet, from fasting 40 days, 40 nights, learning a certain amount of Torah, not mutilation, but putting oneself through pain and suffering to refine the body so that a person can elevate themselves to a spiritual state. This person was willing to do whatever it would take. But the Baal Shem Tov said, listen, if you really want to see Elijah the prophet, this is what you have to do. In a few days is going to be the holiday of Passover. So on the edge of town, there is a little home. He gave him some instructions where to go. there's a woman that lives there, and her husband works very hard, but he's not able to make very much money, and they are literally broke. They're poor. They have nothing. Take a wagon, fill it up with food. He says, the Baal Shem Tov says, I'll fund the bill. I'll give you the money. Fill it up with food. Make the journey to the edge of town, and right on Erev Pesach, knock on the door and ask if you can spend the holiday with them. And give them all this food and the meat and the wine and whatever they, So he says, and I'll get to see Elijah the prophet if I do this. He says, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So he fills up a wagon, he goes to the edge of town, he knocks on the door, and right before he knocks on the door, he hears screaming in the house. The kids are running around and they're cold and they've got no food, and the wife is complaining to her husband, what are we going to do? There's not enough food for the Seder. We don't even have much. There's no wine. And that's right when he knocks. So they open the door and they see this man, and he says, listen, I would like to ask you if I could, I was on my way home and I'm stuck and I can't get home in time. Could I possibly spend the Seder with you? So she turns to her husband and they look at each other, and that way that husband and wife can communicate without talking, and she says, sure, you can stay with us, but I just want you to know we've got nothing. We've got no food, no wine, and no matzah. He says, don't worry, I have a wagon here. I was on my way to my family. I'm not going to make it in time. I've got everything that we need. He brings in, they can't believe it. They haven't seen food like this. They have a Seder that night, which is unbelievable, and they sing and they dance and eat the matzah and the wine, and the next day of the holiday too. After the first 2 days of Pesach are over, he goes back to the Baal Shem Tov and he says, Rabbi, I did what you said, and I did not see Elijah the prophet. He said, I feel that you swindled me. So he says, no, I didn't. But I'll tell you that there's one thing left to do. In Pesach, the last day of their holiday is also a Yom Tov. It's also a time where we no longer, use computers, and it's like a Shabbat. He says, on the last day of holiday, I want you to go back to this family with another wagon full of food and wine and matzah. Same again. But this time, before you go in, I want you to stand outside. I want you to just be there for a while, listen to the conversation that's going on, and then knock on the door and join them again for the last 2 days. So he says, okay, if this is what it's going to take to see Elijah the prophet, I'll go. He goes, packs a wagon, goes back to the house. Lo and behold, he arrives right before the holiday, the onset of the end of the holiday of Passover. And before he knocks, he listens. And the wife and husband are going through the same conversation as they always do before a holiday. What are we going to do? There's no food, there's no wine. How are we going to make it through the holiday? And the wife turns to the husband and she says, maybe God will send us Elijah the prophet again, like he did for the first days of the holiday. And at that moment, the man realized that his seeking to see Elijah the prophet could actually manifest in him being Elijah the prophet, which means we can all give food to a needy person. We can all be there when someone needs us. And maybe that itself is the secret of Elijah the prophet. Elijah the prophet is the person who saves another person at their time of need. We can all accomplish that in our own lives by being there for another person in their time of need. That takes us to completion. Thank you so much. Really.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you so much.
Ronnie, thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for joining me. Okay. God bless you guys. Have a Feilach and Pesach. Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll be able to celebrate together. Next Pesach in Jerusalem.
Soon. Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Good night.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.